We used to all crash at Jason's house when we came down for Heroes Con because none of us lived here and he had the house, so we weren't big time enough to get put up by Shelton, so we come crash with Jason's house.
Pretty much he became the mayor of Charlotte for a while.
I don't know how I met. I met him at Heroes Con.
I met in Dallas.
Well, yeah, and I met him in Dallas. The gestation of it was I was hired to do Wolverine and the X-Men by Nick Lowe. He's the Spider-Man office editor. And Nick Lowe, before we ever started working together, moved over to Spider-Man, so I never got a chance to work with Nick. So I never got a chance to work with the guy who hired me. So about 4 months into that job, he called me up and was sort of hinting at the edges of like, you know, what are you available to do? At the time, I was just sort of like, I'm way too busy to do. I knew he was talking about doing an ongoing series, a month-to-month series, and I knew I was too busy to do that. So he instantly went right to these Spider-Man one-shots that they were going to do for this larger event called Spider-Verse that had the concept of which is that like every version of Spider-Man that you've ever heard of will be teamed up to face like a common foe. And because there was such a sort of free reign to use anybody, there was a potential to use characters we'd never seen before, so new characters. So initially I pitched him, I jumped on that idea because I grew up reading Spider-Man. And I figured if I ever get to play with Spider-Man just once, like this is it. So I had these guys in mind the whole time. So I pitched a story that was an Uncle Ben and Peter Parker are Spider-Man together. A story which they really liked, but unfortunately like overlapped with some of the bigger plans. But they told me I was on the right track, and in the course of discussion, we sort of landed on this Gwen Stacy as Spider Gwen idea, which was initially just a sentence in Dan Slott's pitch. He just said like, hey, potential things we could see. One, maybe Gwen Stacy as a Spider character. And I grew up in a time when I think so most of us, I don't want to speak for the other guys, but like Gwen Stacy was kind of a plot point in the books. She had been gone for so long.
Also untouchable.
Yeah, and was considered sort of untouchable by comic book fans. That something about the potential for that idea to go wrong was what drew me to it.
I think the pitch of me to cross that line is what drew me to it.
Yeah. And that challenge I found interesting. So with these guys in mind, I told my editor I would sleep on it. Woke up the next morning with kind of a nearly fully formed world. Pitched him on the raw idea of it. He said yes, and then the three of us all got together and sort of started working to make that. From there, it just sort of steamrolled. The minute that the costume design and the concept went online, like people seemed to really take an interest in it. So it's been no looking back since.
Yeah, pretty much we all just got together, just like put our heads together and made it together. Things happen. I had to sell Jason the colors. She wanted traditional Spider-Man blue and red, which I did not want to do. I didn't want to do traditionally out-of-the-box type thing.
Primary colors are the worst.
Yeah. Well, like Jason, like he art directs me and whatnot. It's like more of a courtesy because like Jason's a big superhero guy. I'm not, so just I wanted to appeal to something that appeals to the superhero thing, but also to the outside perspective on it in general. You know, there's a little bit of things with it because people love the hoodie thing. Me and Jason, we both had the same idea. There's the subtext behind it that we really wanted to pitch on there. So the hoodie was the big element that pulled us together with it. And once we figured that thing out, everything just kind of meshed together. Like, because I knew I wanted to keep it very simple, very clean. I didn't want to be revealing at all. It's like, it had to be, what I know about Spider-Man, it had to be every person could be Spider-Man. No matter what gender, what race, anyone could be. So it had to be covered head to toe with it in general. So, and also keep it simple and clean because I'm a big out stuff guy. So I just want to keep it streamlined as clean as I can with it. And push the colors outside of what most people think about what a Spider-Man character is.
Yeah, the prompt was basically that, like, keep it mysterious, make it feel like where gender is not the main design of the costume.
And a lot of it too, like we've had discussion before, like just beforehand, just with other projects. Like if we do a superhero comic, it's just they have to look like they walked off a Kanye West video. Essentially, yeah.
Yeah, so we passed it back and forth a couple times. I would just make little notes. And I wish I'd saved all those files because there was some pretty crazy ones.
There's some, there's one who's like, there's the ones that are actually like glasses for a while too. And I couldn't figure out the like traditional like Spider-Man way, but once we got away from the color scheme and whatnot, it finally like clicked together.
I think the very last note was Nick Lowe saying it needs some webs.
Yeah, that's the reason too. I was like, oh, we put another reason for the hoodie is just like that's the only reason I'm gonna do webbing is there. That's it's
the
on
webs
the
in
hoodie.
the hood are great.
That's the only reason I want like that's the only webbing I wanted to do. And then Nick Lowe's like, put more webbing.
When you write a story, you can't listen to music. But I have a sort of a day job where I draw, so I listen to a lot of music. I also knew, well, there was.
We're a pretty big audiophiles in general.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And I knew that they were. So I knew, like, if you can get your collaborators excited, that's half the battle as a writer. If you can get the people that have to do the actual work excited, then you got a much better chance of resisting the entropy that exists when you do a project. On the other side of that, I think we've seen sort of the default for quote-unquote strong female character in movies and TV these days is scientist and nurse. And I have no problem with scientists and nurse. I think those are great occupations, challenging occupations, I'm sure. But for a younger character, I felt like being a musician or an aspiring artist was a good parallel to being a superhero, because it's a lot of it is centered around how selfish, the balance of being selfish and selfless, having like personal goals balanced against the needs of other people. And it echoed, like in terms of like problems you could throw at her, a lot of that would echo, you know, anytime you have a character that has to be involved with other people and has to meet a schedule, there's always going to be issues. It's like there's no precedent for it, really. It's gotten to be so big, and there's been so much expectation for the first issue that strangely they had no nerves. I've not been nervous at all about it. It's just so surreal that it's almost like impossible to wrap your mind around. Which I think is, and we're also, it's lucky that we're pretty far ahead.
Yeah.
So like there's no flinching and being like, oh crap, we got to go back and fix that.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's how I feel.
No, it's like you got a point too where like any anxiety or any like fears about it just goes away because you just have to. We just got the call like right after the book came out. Really, like so it became like, oh, we're either gonna do a miniseries and it became like,
Oh well, it went from
what was it like?
we could do another short story,
and then
maybe we could do a one shot,
and then Jason's like, Nick's calling. He's like, Nick's calling. It's good news. And like,
I did do that.
Yeah. And then we got the idea to do a series, and like pretty much it was at New York. Pretty much once they announced the book, me and Jason on the street pre-planning or trying to think of ideas for the book, putting our minds like he had general ideas.
I had a lot of ideas.
He had some general ideas
from before I ever wrote the first issue. Otherwise, we would have been in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
My daughter is super into Spider Gwen because she's a drummer and she's blonde. And I mean, if you have like something leaking into your home life from your comics work, it's really gratifying. As a father, as the only father on the Spider Gwen staff, you know, it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I think it's kind of similar to that. My favorite moment was actually kind of two. There were several times when I went to the signing in Portland. At a good 100, 200 people who've never been to a Washington comic store came in just because they heard about the book and picked it up for the first time. That was great. And also, I had like daughters come in and fall in love with it and say like, I want to become a comic artist based on the book. That's a great moment. It's like we got to that weird zeitgeist about it. It pretty much became like a watering point for some point of culture. Really fun. It's a great.
saw Spider Gwen trying to catch a cat.
Oh yeah, I'm pretty tell about that one.